Imagine being trapped in a nightmare where you're accused of a crime you never committed. In this video, we'll explore the stories of innocent convicts who are finally exonerated and set free. So let's get started. Number 6. Luis Vargas. Luis Vargas. An innocent man was sentenced to 55 years to life in prison for a crime he never committed. Convicted of 3 physical assaults based on similar descriptions of the crimes, Vargas spent 16 years in prison until the California Innocence Project conducted a DNA test on the remains of one of the victims. The results proved that Vargas was not guilty. Upon his release, Vargas's first wish was to share some hamburgers with his mom. The story highlights the importance of due process and the devastating consequences of wrongful convictions. Vargas's wrongful imprisonment resulted in a state compensation of almost $900,000. Number 5. David Ranta. He is David Ranta. He was arrested in Brooklyn, New York, by the same NYPD detective that arrested John Bryan earlier. He was arrested for a murder that he did not even commit, but he ended up spending about 37.5 years in prison. He was put in the prison lineup, which was run by Detective Scarcella, and he was identified as the key shooter. But many decades later, the main eyewitness revealed that the detective himself had provided them with a description of whom to pick up from the line. But there was no evidence against him that proved him to be the shooter. The evidence which was earlier shown to the jury was fabricated to plead him guilty to a crime he didn't commit. After decades, the eyewitnesses came up claiming that they were pressured to testify against him. After his release, he hugged his family and received $2 million from the state and about $6.4 million in settlement from the city of New York. Number 4. Daniel Villegas. He is Daniel Villegas. He had spent about 18 years in prison for a double homicide case that he never committed. In El Paso, Texas, he was arrested at just 16 years old, where the detective went as far as beating him and threatening him with the death penalty if he didn't confess the crime. Being a teen and afraid for his life, he went on to sign the confession letter. He later tried to withdraw from the confession, but it was already too late for him. He was charged with capital murder. And the confession letter was the only evidence that was presented before the court, as there was no solid form of evidence against him other than that of the confession letter. The jury later did a retrial of his case where he pleaded guilty and was given a life sentence. After he spent about 17 years in prison, the verdict was thrown out, and he married and started a lovely life. During his third trial, it was to be decided whether he would go back to his home or would be sent back to prison. During this trial, he was cleared off from all the accusations and was proven not guilty of the crimes. The joy was seen on the face of his and his wife at that time. He later went on to sue the city of El Paso. Number 3. Ricky Jackson. Ricky Jackson had spent 39 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. The key witness, a 12-year-old boy named Eddie Vernon, was forced by the police to testify falsely against Jackson. Initially sentenced to death, Jackson's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment after 2 years on death row. Almost 4 decades later, Vernon recanted his testimony, admitting that he had never witnessed the murder. Jackson's charges were finally dropped, and he received over $1 million in compensation from the state. Number 2. Kristen Lobato. She was imprisoned for a crime she never even committed. At the age of 18, she was charged with the murder of a homeless man. She was convicted of first-degree murder, but later on her second trial, she was convicted of lesser charges of voluntary manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 13 to 45 years in prison. After spending 16 years in prison, a new hearing was done, which proved that on the actual day of the victim's death, she was about 3 hours away from her family. After her charges were dropped, she filed a lawsuit against the Las Vegas Police Department, and her compensation is currently ongoing. Susan Mallon. She is Susan Mallon. She received a life sentence when she was 43 because of a testimony given by an untrustworthy witness. She was charged with murder she didn't commit while she was taking her daughter out for a happy meal. Now, according to the informant, she had claimed that she had committed the murder. But later, after some proper investigation, the informant was an untrustworthy one. After her release, she walked on the streets with joy, and a big smile on her face was seen at the time as well. She also took her daughter on a happy meal treat which she had waited for so long. After spending 17 years in jail, the state of California awarded her with $597,200, and the Los Angeles City Council agreed to pay $12 million to Susan.